from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word and another edition for our news, nuggets, and insights. Today is Friday, February 14th, 2020, and we have got a powerful program for you today. Lots of information, but actually before I do, I want to mention, to put on everybody's mind, to continue to pray for the brethren across the nation with all the weather. As I was leaving this morning watching the Weather Channel, there were over 8 million people under a flood watch. In many towns and tributaries along the south and southeast were already flooded. So keep everybody in mind, because it looks like we could have a continuation from last year's spring, and we all know how devastating that was. All right, let's get right into the program. The coronavirus, the global pandemic coming, it's a question, and it could be. So we've got lots of information as we bring you up to date on Tuesday. Of course, by the time you get this, all that information will change, but we have a lot of information to bring you. Trump's peace plan, is it the deal of the century? It's amazing how much is going on and to talk about that pro and con. Now we're going to begin something called a spiritual civil war and the two sides of a battle. When we look at what's going on in the nation, we're conditioned to receive information in a certain way. But is that the way God wants us to look at things? And we will tie that into what we began next week with Brexit and the beginning of biblical fulfillment with a question mark. All righty, let's get right into the program. But we got a new series piece we want to bring in, is You Just Can't Make This Stuff Up. I know we caught the attention last week, so we got a couple of stories to bring you today. This one, you need a little horse sense to understand what's really going on here. An Australian man guilty of using a cell phone while riding a horse because he didn't have a hands-free device. You can't make this up. This is a true story. Under the road rules, a horse is a vehicle, and he didn't have a hands-free device fitted to the horse. Of course, where are you going to plug one into a horse? You can't make it up. The man and the horse was stopped by the police after he was seen holding a cell phone to his ear while riding on a rural road in October. Mudgee, the local court magistrate, said under the road rules, a horse is a vehicle, and he didn't have a hands-free device fitted to the horse, the paper reported. Now, I don't know about you. I mean, you have nothing better to do than to arrest somebody or give them a ticket for using a cell phone on a horse? This is a true story. The judge went on to say, I've had someone charged with being drunk on a horse before. Even that was kind of bizarre, drunk on a horse. But just one, the judge said. The judge said after admitting the case was the first for him. Well, let's hope it's the last. Now, this one here, I'm going to put in a, you think you got it bad at home. Look at this story. The man who robbed a bank to get away from his wife was sentenced. He robbed the bank to get away from his wife. I'm looking at our crew, everybody's laughing here. You probably hadn't seen this one yet. He was sentenced to home confinement. He robs the bank to get away from home, and the judge sentenced him to home confinement. You can't make it up. The Kansas man who robbed the bank last September told the police that he was hoping to get caught so he would go to prison to escape his wife. He was sentenced to 6 months of home confinement after pleading guilty to the Kansas City Star reporter. All right, this is what happened. Ripple handed a note to the bank teller in Kansas City demanding cash and warning that he had a gun. Ripple took the money, $2,924, and then he went and sat in the lobby of the bank where he told the guard that he was the guy they were looking for. He didn't want to go home, and then he got house arrest. Has nothing to do with prophecy, I understand that, but you just can't make this stuff up. All right, let's get into the stories of the news. You know, sometimes these stories are so serious and so sad, you got to bring something out to laugh a little bit. All right, we got a story here, news brief. All right, news brief. This is a story that's not laughable, but it's serious and true. In the UK, there's a Muslim father. He's facing jail time for pulling his 9-year-old son out of the LGBT lessons. All right, the Muslim father in Birmingham is being prosecuted for removing his son from the LGBT lessons, which he claimed risked the safety of his child. The prosecution criminalizes him for not submitting to teaching in breach of his rights. So isn't it amazing that finally you get some news, it's the Muslim side, who finally, of course you can't have that in their faith, just like in our faith, we can't either, but it makes no difference for Christians. But anyway, he pulled his son out, and at this particular time, they're waiting to go to court to find out what's going to go on. Now, we brought this out in stories showing how the laws are changing. So why did I bring that to us today? Because this is the beginning of what's going to be going on in America. We've already got some of the laws that's been changing in California and some of the liberal states. And as soon as this administration is gone and the liberal administration takes on, you're going to begin to see the laws changed and being reinforced to continue to bring persecution and prosecution on the Christians. That's why I'm bringing this story out to you today. All righty, the coronavirus, it is still expanding and there's no end in sight at this time. The number of deaths have already surpassed the SARS virus of 2002 and 2003. Is it a global pandemic? Well, it's depending on who you're speaking to, but many people are saying it is. So now let me bring you up to date on where we brought this up. This is our third week in a row in this. So I'm going to show you how fast the figures are changing. And then I'm going to bring you a report from an individual that's going to be very alarming. And we've done some research before I brought this out to see if this person might be a kook, a conspiracy theorist, or maybe she's actually bringing out some facts. So anyway, here's the update from SOURCE. More than 900 people have died. This was just a couple days ago from the coronavirus in China. The 2002-03 epidemic, which also killed 774. So as we speak this morning, it's well over 1,000. The virus outbreak. So what you're looking at on the screen right now, so let's just keep that up there, Jeff. That was the slide that we used last week, and you'll see that I took and X'd out. There was 89 people in the first week that we did this back at the end of January. Then the morning we did it went to 107, and the number of people affected went to 4,600. So we brought that out last week showing you what was going on. Then we brought you up to date that the World Health Organization brought out that on Sunday, this was Sunday 2/2, all right? Last week brought out, it went to 14,000 with 305 people dead. Then on Monday, as of Monday morning, we went day by day to our program last Tuesday, 17,000 it went to just the next day with 362 deaths. Then on Tuesday morning, a week ago today, we reported that we went to 20,000 people with 426 deaths, right? So that was 1 week ago this morning. Sunday, 2 days ago, 811 deaths, 37,000 people affected. So you can see, these are just day by day. Now this is just 5 days from last Tuesday, where it was on Sunday. Then yesterday morning, February 10th, 946 deaths, went to 40,000 people. And then this morning, as I left, there were 1,016 people dead with 42,346 confirmed cases. So you can see in 1 week, it's more than doubled. Now, here's the problem. We don't know if these are true figures. There's a lot of people saying now that this is not even the beginning of the tip of the iceberg for what's really going on. And we want to talk about that as we go forward, all right? The whistleblower, in case you didn't know, the very first person who actually brought this out was beginning in January. He brought it out, it was a Dr. Li Wing-Lang, who's 34, the ophthalmologist. Well, he was actually attacked by his government for reporting on it. But his concern was the virus was beginning to leap and grow in tremendous ways, and that was as early as December. Well, he's also dead now from the virus. So I wanted to bring that to your attention. So people who come in contact with, just like this doctor, in fact, anybody who actually mentioned that back in December, the government would swoop in, scoop them up, and you're never to be heard from again about this virus. Now, with that said, this is what I want to bring us to today. So I want to caution everybody, I believe this report has confirmation to it because of the person who's bringing it out. It may not be so, but I'm going to bring it to you today, and we're going to monitor this and to see where it goes, because the person that we're going to be bringing out is Ilana Friedman, who is actually an intelligence analyst, and she's done this for decades for our federal government and major companies. Let me give you her background. So I'm going to give you a little longer into the background so I can tell you what it is she has to say. She's a veteran intelligence analyst and an advisor in intelligence-led counterterrorism solutions that have been used by the government in those areas. She was trained in Israel, where she lived and worked for 16 years. Then she returned to the U.S. and served as the CEO of Jared Group International in Massachusetts to 2009. Since then, she's been an independent consultant working with major corporations and government agencies on security issues. And finally, her global network of specialists in the field and her assets provides an ongoing research of critical and real-time intelligence of domain expertise. So now, with that, all right, with all of that said, I'm going to read you something that's in her report that we were bringing out, and then I'm going to go back to the computer. She says, the stories coming from China over the past weeks have ranged from wishful thinking to pure fiction, while the rest of the world holds its breath, waiting for a new pandemic to strike. There is no way to overestimate the calamity that is occurring in China today. The number of people there who have been infected with or killed by the novel coronavirus, or the threat that the rest of the world is now facing because of China's systematic carelessness to activate repression of vital information. She's saying you cannot overestimate what's going on. It's far worse than anybody imagines at this stage. She goes on to say they covered it up. It's pretty bold in a report by an analyst that the governments have used, and many major firms who watch their security uses as a detailed analyst reporting facts. She says they have covered it up, referring to China, and they arrested anyone who revealed that a coronavirus known as the 2019 novel coronavirus or 2019 nCoV was now killing their own people by the thousands. Now, this is a report from her a couple of days ago, and our report that we just showed you up here, the official report is 1,000, 16,000, 19, somewhere about that. She's saying that thousands have already been killed. Even now, the entire world is facing a pandemic. China still only admits to hundreds of confirmed deaths and thousands of infected people. When the numbers are likely to be exponentially higher, they still refuse the assistance from the United States. I think that finally changed as of yesterday or last night. All right? They said it was under control. She writes, nothing can be further from the truth. People, and this is her report from what she's getting from the people inside of China that's not going through the normal agencies. People were falling in the streets and dying where they fell. The hospitals were jammed with people seeking medical help, and people were being ordered to stay home and to limit contact, or other people even forced to self-quarantine. And finally, the city was shut up and no one could go in or go out. All right, that's part of the report. It was a fairly long report that she had. So now, going on, she says this. I don't know why that didn't erase underneath it, but hopefully you can see this. According to my sources, the virus actually escaped. Here's what she's saying. We were told that it started somewhere in an open market and may be transmitted from animals. What she is saying, it happened in a laboratory, and that it actually escaped from the Wuhan Institute of Virology Level 4 biohazard lab as a result of an accident in the laboratory. And more than that, China had been weaponizing the virus. So they're saying that this is something China's been doing, is creating chemical warfare in a virus that escaped. This is what they're coming down to, what her information is she is reporting. I don't know that it's exactly true, but it seems to have more and more legitimacy. Because last night they're trying to say now it came from a bat that was put on little animals that people were touching a funnel with. But anyway, she's saying it was actually from their biolab. All right, so China has been weaponizing the virus to make it more virulent, easily spread, and faster to mutate, and potentially more lethal. So as you can see how fast things are going, it's probably true. The latest estimates, and this is going to shock everybody, that's why I say, caution in what you read, we're going to keep proving this out. The latest estimates from her firsthand accounts are that as many as 50,000 people in the Wuhan alone have already died, not been affected, but died from the epidemic. And in this article, she shows you the city totally shut down in this huge fog. And the fog, she's saying, is from the areas where they are burning the bodies of all the people because there's not enough room to bury them. And that's what she's saying. And that there are as many as 1.5 million confirmed coronaviruses in China. Now, that's a lot to take in from what we're being told. But this lady has done a lot of research, and like she says, it's not important for her to get the information out first. It's important for her to get the information out correctly, is what she's saying. So I wanted to bring this to you so we can be aware. And the reason I'm saying it is this. This follows the sequencing of the information that we read with the pestilences in the Bible. How can a pestilence grow that fast? Well, it may be that when God takes his hands off this world and releases Satan to do whatever he wants to do, that we are now breeding within mankind themselves the technology to begin the virus to destroy mankind quickly. It makes a lot of biblical sense, whether people want to listen to it or not. That's why I wanted to spend a little extra time in this segment, but this is the information that the news does not want to touch because, like they say, it could just be a conspiracy theory, it could be a wild guess, who knows? And it may be, but it's something we better take a look at and see what's going on. All right, the Middle East peace plan. Let's move on. Trump's Middle East peace plan, the deal of the century. What a huge gamble. Where are they going to go from here? Well, we just want to, again, bring you up to date. It's got a long way to go before anything settles here. The EU, believe it or not, how can the EU, but they're EU, they're being controlled through the Muslim mindset. They have rejected this plan. The EU, of all places. Brussels, the European Union, on Tuesday rejected the Trump plan in its proposal for securing peace in the Middle East and expressed concerns about Israel's plans to annex more Palestinian lands, which, of course, has set the Palestinians off into an uproar. However, the plan was welcomed by Benjamin Netanyahu, but the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, has dismissed it as nonsense. The Gulf Arab states also rejected the White House plan as being biased. And I can see that. Of course, you know, your mindset, the United States and Israel, they're brothers. The world may not understand the brothers they are, but they are the sons of Israel. They are brothers, and they think alike. And at the same time, it was a plan that they're not going to get from anybody else. All right? The White House officials were present for its unveiling, but no Palestinian representatives were there. But they were invited, which the report did not tell us about. This is from Gatestone, which brings a lot of information in that area. The Palestinian Authority, the President Mahmoud Abbas, has called for his people to step up the popular resistance. That means more attacks, more rockets, more fighting, and more killing, calling the plan a conspiracy. He also planned to be in New York to speak to the UN Security Council to stop this plan for peace. In the meantime, since he brought this out, there has been more eruption of violence in the area. Israeli Defense Forces have been on heightened state of alert since the publication in January 28th. They have now sent 3 waves of reinforcements to the West Bank to protect the area, including the additional battalion of combat troops, which were on Thursday, January 30th. Then, on Friday, February 7th, following Mahmoud Abbas's statement for more violence, it breaks out. 3 attacks in 12 hours in a day of violence, causing casualties in the West Bank with several clashes, and 3 people were killed. 14 Israeli soldiers were wounded from the attacks by the Palestinian assailants. 2 Palestinian policemen were also killed by the IDF. So it's not anywhere close to bringing peace. And as we know from the Bible, in Luke 21, it says, when you see armies surrounding Jerusalem, then we will know that the end is getting near. Well, these are all the preliminaries. This is all the preliminaries that's going to lead up to an all-out war that until Jesus Christ comes back, this will not stop. It's just not going to stop. Now, spiritual civil war. Now, I'm beginning here in laying out the information how I'm going to bring a sermon this Saturday, and I may not call it the spiritual civil war, but I'm going to bring out information that you might not be aware of. How do you read things when you hear stuff from the news? You know what's interesting? I can listen to people talking, and most of the time I can tell you what news they're listening to, how they think and how they act, and what the statements they're saying. And I know when I travel at the feast and I'll hear comments when people are talking, you pretty much know where the news, because the news controls our mindset. Now, this is important because God's people, you cannot have a narrative, a news person, anybody, whether you're on the right hand or the left, control what you think. But what they do is they control the narrative, put a thought in your head, and when it finds and resonates a place and home, and it meets what you feel, that's what you buy. That's what you're told. But let me show you what's going on here, because the Bible shows us and has been telling us, and what we need to do now is get beyond the physical. All right, we need to keep thinking spiritual when you see all this stuff going on in the news. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, against the rulers of darkness, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. When we see a story, our mind cannot stay on the story. Your mind has to be analytical to go into beginning to weigh out, where does this settle? What is the story about? Does it have any biblical significance? Is it prophetic? Or is it just nonsense? And what you have to do is go out and understand, what is the end time goal of God's plan? Does this fit into the plan? And I'm telling you that for a reason, because this year you're going to be inundated with so much about an election that is going to be pulling people all different directions. But here's what you're looking at. You're looking at this, as I'm going to be covering this in just a second. I'm going to show you the civil war that's beginning to line up right now as we speak. You have the one side, which is a push against socialism, and you have the side that's pushing for socialism. And on this section here, I'm calling it the rise of the beast power, the coming biblical socialism. Let's start with that part of the Civil War right now. This is the rise of the beast power that you're looking at that's going to be coming from the Pope, because his plan is to create a global socialism being controlled by one person, which the Bible refers to as the beast power. Look at his latest mandate. Tax the rich. The Pope Francis calls for global wealth redistribution. Wouldn't it be interesting? He says, wouldn't it be interesting if he start with the Vatican, because we're about the richest nation on the face of the earth. You're not going to get that. But they are. In other words, tax them, and we're going to tell you how to spend it, how to use it, and who's going to be able to distribute it. It says the tax cuts for the wealthy constitutes, this is coming right from him, structure of sin. Giving a tax break to the wealthy is a sin. That's what he's saying. Pope Francis said Wednesday in the passionate address calling for international wealth redistribution. We've actually been talking about that now for a couple years. In America, it's called the Green New Deal. The redistribution of wealth is what it boils down to, because as we have covered in this program in the past, you cannot accomplish the goals of the Green New Deal. It is impossible. There is no way. There's not enough money on this planet, and there's not enough technology. But it doesn't matter. They're going to do it anyway, because it fits the mandate of a spiritual plan, the spiritual plan of Satan controlling this world. All right, that's what's actually going on here. So when you see the Pope say this, and you reach out and say, does this fit the mandate of what the Bible's talking about for end-time prophecy? And it does. It absolutely does. So what are we looking at here? Remember, this all began, and we showed you that beginning last year. The New Deal, this was when Roosevelt began with this, was a series of programs, public work projects, and reforms and regulations that began from 1933 to 1936 that responded its needs to relief. In other words, create the need, go fill the need. When the people have a need, they will give you anything you want. Help me. And he began back then to change the Constitution of the United States. Until he did that, and he couldn't do it right away because it went back to the Supreme Court over and over again. And each time it went to the Supreme Court, he put in a new program. They brought that to the Supreme Court, he put in a new program. So during the whole time, you know what else he did? He changed the Supreme Court justices. Why do you think there was so much hate going on with the Supreme Court justices? Because the ones going in today stopped all this nonsense. So when you see the battles erupt and get larger and larger, there's usually a spiritual reason behind it. Those are the areas that you're following. All right, so he began to change the Constitution. What did he change? This is real simple. You can't take from one and give to another. That's the way our government was set up from the beginning. In other words, you can't take from me to give to you. They can't take from you to give to someone else. But according to the New Deal, that all changed. What is the Green New Deal? It's all going to change because it's going to take a socialist effort to be able to take away from everybody to give to the plan. What is the Pope saying? We gotta tax the rich. We need to change everything around the world and redistribute the wealth. The Pope calls it humanism. The world calls it globalism. One's the physical, one's the spiritual. They both embody the beast power. That's what you're seeing, and they need the United States' wealth to do it. And when God finally removes his hand once and for all, heaven help this nation because it's going to go down. The New Deal was the beginning of the removal of the Constitution as it was written. Will the Green New Deal, this was a question we asked, will the Green New Deal be the final stake in its removal to socialism? And it will. Way back, the Examiner wrote this, Trump to Ocasio-Cortez, America will never be a socialist country. Well, that may be yet to be seen because I tell you, the people who are running for office today are primarily socialist. The last Democratic debate that they had, only one person on that stage raised their hand and said, I'm against socialism. All the rest embraced it with both arms. And socialism is a government run telling you how you will have your life. The Pope is literally creating a socialist world, whether we believe it or not. The Bible calls it the beast. We know it as the beast of Revelations in chapters 13 and 17. And if you haven't studied that, you need to begin getting familiar with that. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today in our Nuggets program. February 14th, 2020, the re-education process with the Pope and his global domination begins. We've been talking about that as we go forward. And this was in the slide that we talked about what was going on. The reinventing global education. What is going to be one of the mainstays is removing of all wealth that's going to be good for the world, not good for the individual, the country, or the business. So we've been talking, so I'm going to move on because we've talked a lot about that. So now, let's go on to the other side of the coin. You have, in America, you had a north-south. Here we have a spiritual, you have a conservative, you have a liberal movement. People know that as an election between Democrats and Republicans. It's really not. It's deeper than that. It's a battle that's going between a spiritual, between Satan, and between God is where this is going. Now, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is God or anything God-related, but God uses people to bring about his plan. The big deal is his push against socialism and the protection of the conservative Christians' rights is what we're looking at here. Look what Tony Perkins said. This Tony Perkins, I'm going to tell you who he is in just a second, but Tony Perkins said that Trump is dismantling the left's anti-faith agenda. When you look at socialism, what's one of the first things that has to leave? Is beliefs, faith, church. Why? Because it does not function, the Bible does not function in a socialist society because it's not built on biblical truth. All right, the president of the Family Council, that's who Tony Perkins is, and pastors believes that President Trump is the man for his time because of his fight for religious liberty. Notice, he didn't say that Trump is a religious person. He doesn't say that he's a righteous person. But he's the person that God put into the picture here to protect what we need to continue to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. As I brought out just a little bit earlier, look at the Muslim leader. They're going to put him in jail just for taking his daughter out of school because he would not let her be taught the LGBTQ community teachings. All right, let me back up here. The president, this is on the bottom, right? The president has not only ceased the war on the people of faith, and believe me, there was a battle on the war on the people of faith. We saw it encroaching even as we did our news nuggets and insights for years. All right? He said he's building a bulwark of people of faith can openly practice their faith. If you watched the president's address of the State of the Union, he talked about protecting the freedom of faith and religion. He talked about bringing prayers back to school and keeping them protected. And he went on to say this, and what he's doing makes the left so mad that he's dismantling the infrastructure and that they've used and advanced in anti-faith. Big government agenda that they're not going to be able to jump back into the driver's seat and to take off again. So everything we're doing here to give us the freedom that was removing the constitutional protections for you and I, Donald Trump has believed it, whether they want to admit it or not, whether you like him or not, he has reinforced those protections. That's one of the reasons they're so angry, right? Because the battle is not physical, it's spiritual, right? We need to keep thinking that way. He went on to say, he said it's going to take them decades to rebuild. That I don't believe. Because you see what Donald Trump's doing, he's doing through presidential mandates, which you don't need laws to change. The next president come in, just like Donald Trump did, they'll scratch him out, put his own in, and they're back in business. That's what's going to happen. I don't believe this last piece for a second. Why? Because of the structure that God's given to us in the 2030 agenda. And when they get back in office in the left, the non-godly I call it, they're going to be so angry. What about that anger? Let's talk about that for just a second. Look at this paper here. Lincoln, an impeachment threat. That's pretty cool. I found this the other day. October 17th, 1868. Well, he didn't live that long. This was actually a story in a play that had Lincoln lived, he'd have been impeached. I thought that was pretty interesting that whoever came up with that concept brought it out. So let me bring in what he did do, though. He said, a house divided cannot stand speech. He said, a house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently, half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved, but I do expect the house to fall. I said, I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. It will become one thing or all the other. In other words, you can't stand in it's going to be one way or the other is what he believed was going to take place. Now, how many people remember this in the news this past week? That has made the news over and over and over again. In fact, the Democrats have petitioned the people who run these websites to remove it, because it hurts their image. Well, look what the Bible says. Look at Proverbs 14, verse 1. Look what Proverbs 14, verse 1. Nancy Pelosi says, this is her house. He came into my house, and I don't appreciate what he said, right? But look what the Bible says. Every wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands, that should be hands, not ands, the foolish woman tears hers down. Isn't that amazing? This was wrong on so many levels. God says you pay respect to the person he put in charge. And you cannot live and do what she's did and think that's going to help this nation whatsoever, whether you agree or you disagree. Because what you break down is the principles of the biblical laws that God set in place, and you cannot change those. It doesn't matter whether you like it or you don't like it. You cannot change it all. Jeremiah says this. Let's put it into a nugget portion now. In the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, the king of Judah, the word came to Jeremiah from the Lord. He said, take a scroll, write on the words that I have spoken to you concerning Israel and Judah and all the other nations that I began to speak to you from the reign of Josiah. Now, we're in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, and God's been talking to Jeremiah since Josiah. Josiah was a godly king, giving them the warnings. Verse 3, perhaps. Why am I telling you all this today? Why does God want us with all diligence to proclaim the word of God to a world who doesn't want to hear it? Why? Because of this, perhaps, God says, when the people of Judah hear about every disaster I plan to inflict on them, they will each turn from their wicked ways. Why do we do this every week? It is our hope that with your help, you will help us get this message out. That maybe somebody will hear these words, and perhaps, as God says, they will repent from their wicked ways and not have to go through what's going to overcome all mankind. Now, you can say it ain't going to happen. Jesus Christ is going to come back. Doesn't make any difference. It's going to happen because it's laid out through the plan of God. Then God says, then I will forgive their wickedness and their sin. That's what we're doing here today. God goes on with Jeremiah. In verse 21, we'll pick up the story. So he sent Jehudi to fetch the roll, and he took it out of Elishama, the scribe's chamber. What scroll? Everything Jeremiah was writing from the time of Josiah to that point. And he read it in all the people's ears, and many of them repented. But when the leaders heard about it, they were concerned. They were scared, and they began to bring it to the king. And when Jehudi read it to the ears of the king, the ears and all the princes which stood beside the king, and he sat in the winter house in the 9th month. And there was a fire on the earth burning before him. And it came to pass that when Jehudi had read 3 or 4 leaves, that he cut it with a penknife, and he cast it into the fire that was in the hearth. And it reminded me of that little video you just saw in the background of Nancy Pelosi behind Donald Trump, tearing everything up. So as Jehudi read the papers, he hated. He would go through a certain point, he would take his knife, he would cut it off, tear it up, and throw it in the fire until the whole scroll was finished. And he cast it into the fire that was in the earth until the roll was consumed in the fire that was on the earth. Yet they were not afraid, nor rent their garments, and neither the king nor any of his servants heard all these words. So what did they do? He went out to find Jeremiah in the scroll, in the writer, what they call it, the scribe. The scribe, just right out my head there. The scribe, and wanted to kill him because of the anger of what God had written. And then God brought them back together, Baruch and Jeremiah. He said, now go back and write it all over again. So when you read Jeremiah, that's actually 2nd Jeremiah, because the first one was all burned up. And he told him, not only are you going to write what I told you before, I'm going to give you more to write. And he did. And it's recorded for you and I today. And then God hid Baruch and Jeremiah so the king couldn't kill them at that particular time. All right, a lot of information. I know I went through things real quick, but I wanted to get through a lot because I got more to give you. When we come back, I want to tie all this in to the stories that I gave you earlier. So when we come back, we're going to talk about Brexit and the beginning of biblical fulfillment. But right now, let's take a little short break, take a look at this video. Love never fails, and we'll be right back to continue our busy program today. All right, welcome back. I'm glad you're back. Glad you're staying with us. So now let's get right back into our program today because we've still got a lot to cover here. We're going to move kind of quickly with it. We're going to pick up where we left off last week with Brexit. When you look at the prophecies that's being fulfilled in front of our very eyes today, it's amazing. It's really hard how people cannot believe that there's something going on that ties all of these prophetic things to take place right now. So now, let's begin with the Brexit and leaving. This is where we began last week. The UK left the EU on January 31st, 2020. All right? They said there'll be a transition until then, at the end of 2020, and then they're gone. We played that video. It's a great little video. Everybody's laughing. They're waving their flags. They're leaving. He said, we're gone. We're never coming back. So we talked about that last week. So now let's bring you up to date on what the church has taught on this for many, many decades. As far back as 1956, even before Britain ever joined the EU, Herbert Armstrong wrote that Germany is the economic and military heart of Europe. Probably Germany would lead and dominate the coming United States of Europe, but Britain will be no part of it. But as we know, they did go in when they prophesied they would come out. He wrote this in The Mystery of the Ages, says the soon coming resurrected Holy Roman Empire, a sort of soon coming United States of Europe, a union that comprised 10 nations, will rise up out of the following common market today, and Britain will not be a part of that empire soon to come. And that's basically what's taking place now. They moved out, and they're not going to be a part, and we believe there'll be other nations that are going to move out also, because the 10 nations fulfills the prophecies that began all the way back to Daniel. That's what we were talking about last week. It always brings us into Revelation chapter 13 and chapter 17, talking about the beast. It says, so he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit on a scarlet-covered beast, full of the names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. We see there's the woman, there's a scarlet-covered beast, 7 heads, and 10 horns. And as we went through last week, we're showing that this is the woman sitting on 7 hills. The woman's color is that of the Catholic Church. And we began to go through all of that last week, which we'll go through again. But now let's tie in together what it is we're actually looking at. My purpose today is not to go through a great deal of the explanation of what's going to come in Revelation, but to pull everything together from Daniel to show us that when we look forward, what's actually taking place that God gave us in Daniel, all right? Daniel 2. It says, and you, O king, and behold a great image. And this great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, in the form thereof was terrible. The image of the head was that of gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly, his thighs of brass, and his legs of iron, and his feet were part of iron and part of clay. This is the king looking from the time of Daniel, looking forward through the vision of what God gave Nebuchadnezzar. So now we understand, as God went through, we look at history, and we see the head of gold was Babylon, beginning with Nebuchadnezzar, 605 to 539 BC. The breast of silver was Persia. It was the powerful nation that came in following the decline in the fall of Babylon. Then came the thighs of brass, which was Greece, 331 to 168 BC. And then finally what we have is the legs of iron, the feet of iron and clay, which is Rome. All right, that's from 168 BC to 476 AD. Now, that does not stop there. It only stops there basically as far as the nations looking back is a continuation of the power of the governments that run this earth. But what God shows us by taking this information, he brings it forward to Revelation, showing us that the horns of what we were looking at is the continuation of Rome as it dies and is revived in the power that goes through until the time of Christ. This is what we see when we put chapter 2 and chapter 7 together. So here in chapter 2, God gives us the image that ties into what we just looked at right here. Daniel 2, 20, 21. Daniel said, blessed is the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and he sets up kings. This is coming from God's holy word. No power exists unless God allows it or God brings it about. And we know that in many cases, God brings the kings in power that accomplishes his will. Like Cyrus has been batted around a lot, which comparing to Donald Trump. He's called Cyrus my servant. So God uses who he will to accomplish his goal. And here's something we need to remember as a church. If we don't do our job, God will raise someone else up to do the job because his will be accomplished. That's imperative that we understand that as a church. That's why it's urgent upon all of us to put our hands to the plow to work, because God says he's looking for someone to stand in the gap, to take care of that breach, to warn the people for its coming. And that's what we're doing here. Now, the image. Let's take the image from 2. Now let's look at image in chapter 7 and show you the two, how they connect, because it's important that we understand this connection so that when we go to Revelation, when we see the beast in animal form, we understand what it is we're looking at. So all my purpose today is this, is to tie 2 to 7 and show you how the beast resemble the type of power each of these nations had. They had different, like Greece or Persia with the power of the water in their ships. You had Alexander with his speed that he would be able to move in Greece. So now, the image described in Daniel 2 is repeated in Daniel 7 in the form of animals to describe the different kingdoms. So now let's take a look at that. Daniel 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and the visions on his head and upon his bed. And then he wrote in the dream, and he told the sum of the matters that was in his dream. And Daniel spoke and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds on the heavens strove upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came out of the sea. Now, as we know, if we look at Roaring Seas, if you haven't seen that series, it's online. You need to get that series to understand what God talks about when he talks about seas. He's talking about the people. He's talking about the unconverted people. And he's saying that these beasts came out of the unconverted from around the world and formed these beasts, is what God's telling us here. And they were different from one another. So now, verse 4. The first beast, right? So I got a picture here. There's all kind of pictures if you go to the internet. This one here seemed to be closely related to, as best I could understand, from Daniel 7. And boy, wouldn't it be nice in this day and time if we find somebody in our listening audience who's an artist. And you can create for us our own style interpretation that we understand what's going on here that belongs to us that we can use. Wouldn't it be nice? So if you're out there and you're an artist, get in touch, because we sure love to have you. All right, so the first beast was like a lion and had eagle's wings, and I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on its feet as a man, and the man's heart was given to it. So this is talking about the strength and the power. So what are we looking at? You're looking at like the head of gold, the power and the strength, like Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 2. All right, going on. Verse 5, and behold, another beast, a second, like a bear. And he raised itself up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth and between its teeth of it. And they said unto it, arise, devour much flesh. Now, as we go into this series, as we go down the road, because this is going to take a long time, but I want to lay the foundation today. The ribs are very important that we understand, the 3 ribs, all right? And God tells us about that as we go. He had 3 ribs in his mouth between its teeth, and he said to it, arise, devour much flesh. All right, there's the second. That's Persia. All right, so we're looking at with the second nation being Persia. All right, going on. All right, verse 6. And after this, I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon its back, it had 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and the dominion was given to it. So that's what we're looking at with Greece. So we know that at the fall of Greece, right before it did, it was broken down into 4 different divisions. So we know history. See, you can see what God's showing here. And looking back, we can see that each of these nations played a part, and we know that by looking at the beast of what God described that was coming. All right, let's go on. All right, and the last one, and in the last one we have, come on, it's getting stuck here. There we go. Number 7. It said, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, strong exceedingly, and it had a great iron teeth, and it devoured and broke into pieces, and it stamped the residue with the feet of it. It was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. We'll go through and we'll describe all that as we're going. And this beast was more terrible and is diverse from all the rest, because this beast, Rome, devoured and incorporated all the worlds before it. So it took all the power from each of the different nations from before it, and that's what we're looking at written into the beast. And God says, and I considered the horns, and behold, there came one among them, a little horn, whom before there were 3 of the first horns that were plucked out by the roots. And behold, in his horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that's speaking great things. And some translations say terrible things or perverse things, and we know that's in Revelation also. Daniel 7 verse 9 goes on to say this, and I beheld. How long does this last with these nations? Well, we don't have to guess. God tells us. And I beheld that the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was as pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning. From the times of Daniel, God laid out the power of the nations until the second coming of Jesus Christ. So what we're looking at is that God gave us to understand from Daniel that looking forward, that all these nations would exist until the return of Jesus Christ. We have the same confirmation in Daniel chapter 2. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 2 and see that. Verses 34 and 35. And you saw till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them into pieces. Now this is important because where did we start this series? With Brexit, remember? Brexit was leaving the EU. Why do we say that? Because it's been understood by the church through a revelation that God gave this church way back from the 30s and the 40s, that these 10 toes would be the newly formed United Nations of Europe that would come out, that God would exist before the return of Jesus Christ and would be headed by Germany. And they were saying this when Germany was in ruins and everybody laughed at them. But it came to pass, and it's happening right before our very eyes. It says, and then there was iron and the clay and the brass and the silver and the gold broken into pieces and became like chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, that the stone that smote the image became the great mountain and filled the whole earth. Talking about the coming of Jesus Christ, who is our rock, the stone that smashes everything and establishes his kingdom on this earth. So what we're looking at in Daniel, moving forward into Revelation, that God has given us a history of how the nations would play out until the return of Jesus Christ. And it's in Revelation that gives us how it plays out in the day by day, year by year, leading up to the return of Jesus Christ. Daniel 2:44 says this, and in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and shall consume all these kingdoms as it did stand, shall stand forever. So what are we looking at? I said the Civil War, right? I'm pulling it all together now. The Civil War, the people fighting against the socialism, because what's lining up right here is this verse. Is Jesus Christ is soon coming back to be our King, our Lord, and our Savior on this earth. He's going to smash to pieces everything that's building up. And that final revival of that Holy Roman Empire that's going to come back one more time, God's going to take and destroy that. And before that happens, he's going to go after everybody. The Pope and the Holy Roman Church is going to go after everybody by encapsulating all the world. And how are they going to pay for it all? Through his socialism world of redistributing the wealth of this world, to use that to fund this world to fight against Jesus Christ. But it's all going to be for naught, because Jesus Christ is going to win. Take a look at the end of the book of Revelation. I peeked. Got a great ending. You do the same thing. Well, that's our program for today. Let's go back to the home office and see if we can begin to wrap this up. Satan's plan of counterfeit deception. We've been talking about this every week. We can just keep reminding you, if you haven't seen it, go online, take a look at Mardi Gras. We're in the Mardi Gras season, the middle of Satan's plan, and we'll be moving into the Easter season next. It's online. If you haven't seen it, you need to take a look at it. And by the way, we also mailed out a new sermon on Easter, which ties a lot of that stuff together, makes it a lot more easy to understand. This is actually this week. I didn't change last. It should be this week. Being mailed out this week. Being Prepared Spiritually by Bobby Weber, one of our ministers right here at the home office. And our News Nuggets and Insights on 12420, talking about Mardi Gras, the U.S. economy, and pedestry. I never should have tried to jump into that word again. I didn't have success when we did the program. I did just as good today. But anyway, great program on News Nuggets and Insights. As always, let's close our program out with a little video. You're going to love this video. Get the kids, all right? Get the kids and put it on pause. Go get the kids. Take a look at this. It's called The Pencil Story. And you grown-ups, you're going to have to pay attention to how this works to see what it means. Let's play The Pencil Story, and I'll be right back. Did you get it? Pretty simple, huh? God tells us, stay in the lines. Don't go to left, don't go to right. But if you happen to fail, you make a mistake and you're out the lines, God's a merciful, forgiving God, and it shall follow us all the days of our life. What a great little story. I wanted to share that with you and close our program. That's it. That's it for our program again today. A lot of information, a lot to absorb. You may want to watch it twice. And don't forget, share it with all your friends. They're going to love you for it. Maybe one or two. Till next week, God be with you. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget, pray for the brethren.